Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We have to this very special occasion. First of all, I have the honor to welcome the Lady Ambassador of Sweden, Annika Markovic. Thank you very much for having made this event possible. We have today a discussion of the new plans of the Swedish government for a Jewish museum, together with the Holocaust museum that already exists as a model for a globalized memory culture. And so to speak, we are having this event here with a special guest from Sweden, sitting here in front of me, Erika Aronovich. And the event is, so to speak, a little bit of a reflection of a bigger event that is being hosted by Sweden and by the Prime Minister of Sweden today, Stefan Löfven, who has called together the heads of state or their representatives to make special pledges for combating anti-Semitism and to further the remembrance of the Holocaust. I am here today actually in two functions. One is to welcome you as a member of the board, and also in my second function, which will be, I will be the commentator and a little bit the, what do you call it? Moderator of the discussion of the two ladies who will be presenting here. May I also just welcome the head of our board, who is sitting here, former member of parliament, Teresia Stojcic, who is head of the board of Wiesenthal Institute. Thank you very much. May I, Lady Ambassador, ask you to speak a few words to our public. We would be very grateful.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Wiesenthal Institute for organizing this evening today with us, the Swedish Embassy, and also thanks to my colleague Morten, who has been organizing together with the Wiesenthal Institute. This is an important event for me. I'm Annika Markovic. I've been here as the Swedish ambassador only a little bit more than 1 month. So to be able to host this together with the Wiesenthal Institute today, I think it's really important and a great start for me in Vienna. Yes, today is a very special day in Sweden as well, because the Prime Minister has invited heads of state and heads of government to the Malmö International Forum on the Holocaust, and this is something that we had planned already to host last year, but then of course the COVID pandemic happened, and we are very happy that it could actually take place today. And it takes place in an environment when we see that threats and even anti-Semitism actions are rising around the globe. We see that happening here in Vienna, we see it happening in Sweden, especially also in the city of Malmö. We have had a number of incidents over the years, and that's why also the Prime Minister wanted to host this international forum today in Malmö. And what was important with this event today was not only that the idea was to bring together heads of state and heads of government to talk about the Holocaust and the importance of remembering the Holocaust, but it's also about pledges. And we wanted to create a platform to have something concrete come out of what are we going to do? Because now we know that some of the survivors are already gone and some of the survivors are now dying. So we need to make a concerted effort to make sure that this will never happen again. And that's why these pledges were so important. And I want to read to you the Swedish government's pledge. So the first pledge is to preserve and pass on the memory of the Holocaust. More specifically, a Holocaust museum will be established next year in Sweden. And the government also pledged to promote education to prevent and to combat all forms of racism, online and offline, and to strengthen Holocaust research as well as to promote Jewish life and strengthen Roma inclusion and to enhance security for civil society. So the government has also set aside a budget of 9.5 million euros earmarked to achieve these activities. So it's a serious pledge as well with money. I think that the funds are always needed. And I'm very happy to have read also that we have had a number of heads of state and heads of government also doing pledges in Malmö today. And of course, this gives us a good opportunity to follow up in our contacts over the years. So I'm very happy to be here tonight, and I really hope that this will be the start of a collaboration over the next few years. So thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you very much. I myself am not from the Wiesenthal Institute. I'm on the board of the Wiesenthal Institute. I'm from one of the 8 founding organizations, the Documentation Archive of the Austrian Resistance. So also, as we've already said, with Morten, who has been so kind to also make this event today possible, that we will also would like to cooperate and offer our cooperation in this work. I've been a great admirer of IHRA. I've been a delegate for, I think, 16 years by now. So, and the Stockholm Declaration is something that we all admire all across Europe. And I think this 20th anniversary of the Stockholm Declaration is a wonderful event, and of course the sums that you mentioned make us dizzy a little bit, and we just hope that our governments can come up with something comparable to this. But enough of this talk. Maybe ask our 2 presenters today to come and join me, and we start, I think, with our guest, Erika Aronovich, who is one of the central persons preparing the new museum. We've had a lot of talks in the afternoon already about ideas where we could cooperate, and it's been a very, very fruitful afternoon. Thank you for making this possible. And please, Erika.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I want to say thank you for being invited to this fantastic time over here. And I'm so impressed by the museums, the organization, and the work that you are doing here. My name is Erika Aronovich, and I'm working at the Living History Forum. I brought it here in Swedish, so it's not so easy to see, but the name is the Living History Forum. And I am a mythologist, so I'm not a historian. I work with exhibitions, but in some kind of way it's always been like I'm ending up in Holocaust and historical things anyway. I will take the next one. I think like that. Yes. Here is just a welcome thing. I will start to say something. I don't know, how many are familiar with the Living History Forum? Okay, but I can say some things about this very small government agency, because we are a small government agency. We are about 40 people working there today. And the assignment that we got is, if I say it like this, it's to work for human rights in the outreach of Holocaust, but also crimes against humanity under communist regimes, which I have been working a lot of. So we have these things that we are working with to try to make the society better and to talk about memory, but not only to memory and to know about Holocaust, but to try to kind of give something that will change the future. So we're working with the past, the present, and the future. The future is important for us. We try to find creative ways to give tools to school children, to grown-ups, to people working in the government agency, other government agency, or working in the police and so on. And we try to learn them about the mechanism that's in the society make it possible to get through with racism and antisemitism. And for example, I will give you some ideas. This could be, for example, to work with the bystander. Who is the bystander? Who can be the perpetrator and who can be the victim? This could be this kind of methods. We try not only to learn facts. Facts are important, and we always work with facts. Everything that we do has been tested and researched, and we know it's working. But we try also to reach people by asking questions and ask them, how would you reflect on this? What do you think about this? Do you understand the bystanders? So we try to give them tools so they can go out and change their way of thinking, their own way, but also the society. We think that is important. And for being a very small government agency, we do a lot. We produce exhibitions, and we have a national assignment. So we should not only work in Stockholm, where we have our place, our house, we should be all over Sweden. And that is quite demanding, if you think about that we are 45 people. But we do a lot of travel exhibitions. I think we have 12 big travel exhibitions out in Sweden in different museums. And what we do is, if a museum is showing one of the exhibitions, the educators go to that museum and teach them and learn and discuss with them so they can learn other students about what the item is and what the object is for the museum. We produce a lot of educational material. We have a website that you should certainly go into and look at, and there we have all kinds of materials. We have also materials from Irinen, very good materials about Roma, and here we have a lot. It's like everything that you need for different kind of discussions. We do teacher trainings, and actually COVID have learned something to us. Is that it's very, very good. It's much better if you have a national assignment to do things on the internet than to ask people to come to Stockholm. And to, you know, Sweden is a very long country. If you go from the north, it's like 1 day to coming down, and you don't maybe have the money and so on. So what we do is a lot of education on internet, which has been very, very successful. We carry out surveys. So we only have one historian working in our place, and I think that might sound a little bit crazy, but it's very good. What we do is that we ask other people, other scientists, academics from outside to bring in material for us. We do surveys about antisemitism in the Swedish society today, but we can also do what kind of survey that we need, a report or something. And we can decide ourselves what we need to go deeper into a subject, and we look after that if we carry out that. We arrange public talk and seminars. This is a big part of what we do to all kind of targets group. And we are part of IHRA, as we talked about before, in the outreach of the Stockholm Declaration, this very big international network working together. And we had the Piranga prize, as we give to different people that has done really something special out in the world. It's a way of saying that it's the government human rights prize. It's a very important prize. And also now we have a small exhibition in our house called the Piranga Prize Exhibition. And we have one of the biggest things is that we are from having the assignment from the government to remember the Holocaust Memorial Day. And we have like 600 people coming into the middle of Stockholm to take part in the Memorial Day. But also that we give tips and try to inspire the Holocaust Memorial Day all over Sweden. So if you are in the north or in the south, you can put up on our website what we are doing. And you can also call us if you want us to come to their little city or town. We do that. That's a big part of the work. We were formed in 2003, and we are a government agency under Minister of Culture. And now it says 35, but we are 10 more today. And we have this national assignment. And we can get all kind of assignment from the government. Some days ago, we got an assignment to work with Afrophobia. We have assignments to work with racism. It could be all kind of different things. And I think this is what is very interesting in my work, is that we have to have the heads up and being very fast. We have to get into different subjects all the time. So it's not like it all settled in the organization. We have to be very flexible to be able to take on the assignments all the time. And here I show a bit about this exhibition. It's a small exhibition that we did with the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. And this exhibition was touring a lot in Sweden in different museums. And here we also talk about, we have a micro and a macro line. We talk about what happened with Anne Frank, but also about anti-Semitism today, which is very important. And here we got different kind of exhibitions that we do. We do print-on-demand exhibitions that you can just load down from our website and put it up here, 12 papers. It's used very much in libraries, museums all over. And we have here a photo from the Holocaust Memorial Day when this 600 people is lighting candles. And here it's a letter. And here I'm going to talk a little bit about the new assignment that we had in January. The assignment is about collecting items and witnesses for the new Holocaust Museum in Sweden that will start already next summer with a small exhibition. So we are not the one who's going to build the museum. We are collaborating with the Historical Museum of Sweden that is going to kind of organize everything and to have the museum under the umbrella of the State Historical Museum. But we, as we were already set, the whole organization, we had the first assignment to try to collect items for these museums. And the rumor said that, oh, it's no idea, every object is already found and all witnesses is in show-off archives already, it's nothing. So we started to advertise a lot in different magazines, we started to talk with people, we went around traveling, meeting a lot of people. And today we have around 150 objects. And actually we have found things which we never heard about before. People turned up which we never knew anything about. And it's been really interesting topic to work with. It's really interesting for all of us. And this museum, of course, it will be a different Holocaust museum. It will not be as a museum that was occupied by Germany or Nazis. It will be another kind of museum. And the story that we will tell will be another story. We were, if you know, a kind of neutral country. But of course, it came a lot of people to us. It came a lot of children from the Kindertransport, and it came a lot of people before and after that have been in contact with Holocaust. And also another thing is that we had a lot of Jewish people, or some thousand, living in Sweden and waiting for the Nazis to come. And that is also a story to tell. And then we have the second generation and the third generation who is dealing still with Holocaust. So Holocaust is, of course, it's something very strong in Sweden as well. It's a European phenomenon. It's all over Europe. But it will be, the stories that we will tell will always kind of connect to other countries in Europe. That is natural, of course. And what I wanted to show you here, I got this last night almost. This photo is from a letter. It's a letter that was sent to Lisbeth Jax. She was born on the 15th of November 1923 in Berlin, and she lived in Kanterstrasse. And she was 15 years old when she was put on a train and sent to Stockholm. And on the 26th of May 1939, the family Jax received a letter from Dora Sarah Silberman, who worked for the Jewish community in Berlin. And this pink little letter, which we have, said that you should be on the train this time so you could go to Stockholm, to Sweden. It was sent to her parents. And Liselott arrived in Sweden. She lived on Olivedalsgatan 7 in Gothenburg, I don't know, but it's there. And she worked in a restaurant called Tennstopet, which I visit a lot in Stockholm. And we can follow her total life. And what we got from her is a big, big coffin. It's a big, big truck with a whole human life from the beginning to the end. And her son gave this to us, and they got no connection to the Jewish community. They never talked about this before. he saw a little ad in one of the biggest paper and thought, I will call this Living History Forum and look if they are interested. And of course we are interested in Liselott Jacks. It's a very important case. And we will be able to, through this box and through these letters and everything in there, to kind of see her whole life, what she was doing and how she responded. And there is a lot of letters that we have received, of course, because letter is the change between human beings in this time. So this letter was the last letter from her parents that was sent to Auschwitz. And the grandmother was sent to Theresienstadt. But we can see in this letter, from the beginning, they write a lot about daily things like don't get cold in Sweden and eat a lot, and you should think to wear that kind of clothes and so on. But after a while, the letter gets tinier and tinier, and the parents are very, very tired. They're working in a big factory from morning to evening. We think it's slave labor that we're doing. And they worked very, very hard, and they said, we cannot write to you every day because we are too tired of doing this. But this is one of the fantastic things that we have received, really. I will say something about the kind of reports that we do. We do public knowledge and reports. We carry out surveys, and I think it's very important, this service, because actually what we are seeing is that in the latest anti-Semitism survey, it's not that anti-Semitism is growing among cases, it's the small group that get more and more anti-Semitic. And we can do a lot of surveys and then do exhibitions from this material, which is very important. And this is about then the kind of different original research surveys and public for the general public. This is also important. And we can see that it's a lot of different people that print out and read our reports. It's very useful. One important assignment that we had from the government is to work against racism. And here we have also a big assignment that we are working with all kind of different areas. We try to raise more knowledge, educate, and do we research it. We try to reach the civil society through this and to get a more active legal system. And we also coordinate a lot of government agencies that have the assignment to work with racism, because this is very important. As when you work at a government agency and you have to work with racism, how do you do that? How do you know that you are doing the right work? How can you control that you're actually reaching out? What is the tools for this? So we put them all together and we let them support each other, which is working very, very good. We have also this reference library, the Living History Forum. You cannot loan the books to take it home, but we have a lot of students and different kind of academics sitting there and reading these books. It's a special reference library in the top of Holocaust and the only one in Stockholm. We also tried to collect witnesses, and we have a total of 155 oral testimonies. We would have liked to have more regarding the Roma. We have not so easy to reach out and have Roma testimonies. We would like to have more of that. But we have a big homepage that we have regarding this. Another very interesting, I think, project is Dembra, which is a project from the Hoel Center in Norway that have developed that. And Dembra is a total school project. What we mean with that is that often you work with some teachers in a school, 2 or 3 different teachers, and they go back to the classroom and they can work very, very successful with anti-Semitism and racism. But here we work with the whole school, and then I'm talking about the whole school. We get to a school and we work with the gymnastic teacher, with the one who serves the food, with everyone in the school. And I will take on this to the problem and to see the process little bit how we work. First, they start with an evaluation and talking about what is the problem in this school, what kind of problems do you have in your school regarding antisemitism and racism. So everyone, all the children, all the teachers, everyone is answering this evaluation or survey. And then we do an analyze together with them. But what should we do? What is it that we want to achieve? And then we go to the next step. And then we can go back and say, evaluating, how did it work? So this is a big project which you work for 1 year with only this topic to get a more democratic school. And of course, to get a more democratic school, making people getting more democratic themselves. So it works very, very good. And we have this project group at each school to coordinate. And we have a DEMBRA advisor for each school. And the group workshop where the schools meet and talk together and work together.
How many schools do you work with?
This is now a pilot, so we have 4 schools, but really big schools. And I think this way of working is very interesting because then you really make a change. The whole school have to work with their own problems. Because otherwise, if we start and we are producing material, it works for some schools, but not for others. The problems are very different, is what we see. The problems are very different in different schools. So here they have to really work with themselves, and they have to commit. The teachers have to commit into this and say, okay, we will work with the problems in our school. So it's in a very interesting project. And this is also a part of our racism and how we meet different employers in the society. And I can give you one example of how we work. For example, we have a film about racism, and then they see this film and they work together and say, could this be on the place that we are working in? What does that have to do with us, and so on? So it's a waking up film, bait, provocative, but still there are always tendencies that they can remember and recognize themselves in this. This is talk racism. This is also kind of film that we work with the different groups of people and to educate them. And this is how many people we have. One of these books that you see there on the side is actually about racism. What is racism? Which is a big topic, but it's very good to start with it, to read about that before we go into working with it. Okay. Questions? Can I? Or do you want to?
I don't know. Questions now, or shall we enter then into a discussion of
you
the two
decide.
presentations? Maybe we continue with
Yes,
Liliana.
yes. Okay, thank you.
May I just present Liliana Radomich? Please join us here. She works at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. She is the Austrian specialist in comparative memory culture. I think there is nobody else here who... No, it's true. So we thought she would be the perfect match to our guest from Sweden. And her presentation is on the Holocaust Memorial Museums that she has looked at in different countries, at least in Europe and also I think in the States. And since you are planning this museum, we thought maybe this would be useful or fruitful for both of us. Liliana, please. Yes, of course. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Gerhard, for the kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation, and to the Wiesenthal Institute for having us. Okay, so I'm not involved in collecting objects or testimonies. I would rather analyze museums and critically discuss their permanent exhibitions, especially memorial museums on World War II and the Holocaust. But also beyond, and the beyond will be the topic of my presentation today. I started off with analyzing one country, Croatia, and one museum at the former concentration camp site of the Croat fascists called Ustaša, Jasenovac, and observed that there are so many similarities between the Jasenovac exhibition from 2006 and those museums that were devoted to other topics but shared the same aesthetics, the same musealization approaches, curatorial decisions. So I wanted to know how come that so different museums look so similar. So I went on to my so-called habilitation project. The habilitation is a Central European dinosaur. It's a kind of second doctorate for those who are not familiar with that concept. And there I looked at all the museum landscapes in post-communist EU member states and asked how they changed their exhibitions in order to communicate with so-called Europe during the EU accession talks. Today, I will speak about my very recent project, which is a European Union funded project in which, as Gerhard hinted at, we look not only at museums devoted to the World War II period, but also to those museums devoted to the 1990s genocides in Bosnia and Rwanda. I will not go into the general outlines of my project. I would rather jump straight into my argument and look at one very important curatorial tool that museums can use, which is the focus on individual victims, their biographies, testimonies, biographical objects, and so on, and ask how this travels to other museums devoted to, for example, the Rwandan genocide. You can see, I will go once back, a very similar aesthetics here between Holocaust museums like the US Holocaust Memorial Museum on the left hand and Yad Vashem on the right hand side, where we have this not so new, but newer approach, not to show anonymous heaps of bodies, anonymous masses, or famous politicians who fought in the resistance and therefore are exhibited, but to focus on the ordinary victim or persecuted man, or woman, or child, or elderly. And this design we can basically find in many, many, many museums devoted to many topics. And what I want to do today is ask, what do we make of that? What does that mean? In how far can we make sense of these traveling tropes, these traveling aesthetics, and traveling narratives? Okay, so in some cases, it is not a surprise that the aesthetics look familiar, because in the case of Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, for example, the mayor traveled to the UK and hired a Holocaust musealization NGO to do this exhibition in Kigali. So in some cases, we have a direct relation and cooperation between Holocaust museums and practitioners of Holocaust musealization and the exhibition devoted in this case to the Rwandan genocide. So one argument is that this individual approach to tell the story through private photographs, which show the victims and the persecuted in the way how they chose to portray themselves, not how the perpetrators chose to humiliatingly depict them maybe seconds before their death. This is a very strong curatorial approach that the museums have, but stating that, we also need to add that it can also be quite an empty signifier of just a mere aesthetical reference to Holocaust museums. So this is the tension that I'm interested in. What does it mean? How is it used for the respective national, local, regional purpose? And how is it transformed and translated into these contexts? And what gets lost and what gets transformed in these processes? Okay, here's just another of many examples. This is the Women's Action Museum in Tokyo, devoted to the so-called comfort women, the sex slaves that the Japanese had, where we can see similar aesthetics. I could give you many, many examples like that, but I want to show rather that this individualizing approach, the focus on the individual victim, can mean a lot of things. There is a broad range of what this curatorial, strong, powerful tool for evoking empathy can mean. It can mean that we include only, or the exhibition is reduced to private photographs, or, as in the case of Jasenovac in Croatia, the names of the victims. That would be the first step, but it then depends on how is that used for what purpose in the exhibition. On the other side of the range would be to add to those private photographs also biographical objects that might have been found in excavations, and tell the story of a person that are not anonymous typical Jewish objects or Roma objects for that matter, but tell the story through their excavation story and connect the private photographs with the biographical approach. And another very strong mean, taken in this case from the Roma genocide exhibition in Auschwitz, would be to also, of course, give a voice to the victim and tell her story in this case through a poem that the persecuted Romnia woman wrote. So it can mean a broad range of things when I say the individual approach or portraying an individual victim. Now, how is that used in other contexts? Here's an example from the House of Terror in Budapest, where we again have, like in the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, a several floors high installation with photographs of individual persecuted people. The House of Terror is an in situ museum, so it's located at where first the Hungarian collaborators, the fascists, the Arrow Cross movement in Hungary had tortured people in World War II, and then later the socialist state security. So it has both histories, and this is often the case in Eastern Europe, that a museum is devoted both to the Soviet occupation and Nazi occupation, and then there is a tension and a conflict between also the narratives about the different victims. Now, in this case, the similar aesthetics is clearly explicitly referred to the role model from the US HMM, but in this case used for a narrative of Hungarian collective victimhood. Those are not private photographs taken by a village photographer, as in the left-hand case, but state security mugshots. So perpetrator-taken pictures. They're all cut in a uniform way, and there is a tank, a Soviet tank below them, hinting at that all those pictures are only of victims of Soviet persecution, not of the Nazi period. So this period is excluded in this installation, and also the Soviet tank clearly devotes this whole installation to the victims of Soviet persecution. So although there is a double history of the building, the one part is excluded there. This is a very one of the approaches of how you can use a reference to Holocaust museums and then reuse it for your own nationalist purposes. It's a museum opened in 2002 for Viktor Orban's election campaign as a gift to his voters. Okay, another example stems from the so-called Museum of Genocide Victims, by now renamed into Museum of Occupation and Freedom Fights in Vilnius in Lithuania, where again, we have this double history, first used as a prison in the Nazi period and then in Soviet occupation period. And we have the name Museum of Genocide Victims hinting only at the victims of Soviet persecution, despite the double history. So initially, the museum just jumped from the first Soviet occupation in 1941 to the second Soviet occupation in 1944 and excluded everything that is devoted to the Holocaust, but used these aesthetics that are very familiar from Holocaust musealization, from concentration camp sites, and showing objects that are belonging to victims of Soviet persecution. There was, even before a Holocaust room was added in 2011, there was one tag about where your ankle is, saying that to visitors willing to get acquainted with the period of Nazi occupation in Lithuania and Holocaust more extensively, we suggest visiting the Vilna Gaon Jewish State Museum, a distance of 500 meters. So there was this shouting gap and shouting void in the museum. Before then, in 2011, one cell where we had even prisoner carving their names and the year, for example, 1943, as we can see in the almost see in the left example, where Helena from 1943 left her traces on the wall. we had those traces all the time from the Nazi occupation period. They were just added after a lot of international pressure in 2011 to this museum that had existed a long time before. Now, let's come to the individualization part again. How does that look like in the Lithuanian museum? Here, we have this individualizing approach. We have the private photographs of the persecuted contrasted with mugshots and their biographies when it comes to our Lithuanian majority population victims, whereas when it comes to the Jewish victims, to the new exhibition from 2011, we don't have that. We have anonymous persecuted, their names are not given. We have the term transported, whereas deported is used for our majority population victims. And all the stories of individualization are just missed. So we know who took this photograph above. It was Henrik Ross, who is a famous Jewish photojournalist. The museum just doesn't tell us that. So this individualization opportunity is missed in the museum. And also, the year is wrong and so on. So we have this big Star of David signaling, okay, we have now added the Holocaust to our exhibition. But, okay, another example that I will make only briefly is from the Latvian Museum of Occupation in Riga. They devote the most, from the Baltic museums, the most space to the Nazi occupation. They don't leave it out on the text level. It's there, it's huge, this part, but then we look at the representation of victims, and we can see that there are over 300 biographical objects by the victims that are used in a very empathy-evoking way. During the guided tours, we learn about the girl who made the drawing in the middle on the top, and this is a central part of the guided tours, but all of those objects are again from the victims of Soviet persecution, and the Nazi period is represented differently. So there, the Jewish or the Roma victims that are not almost not present at all here, would be represented by an anonymous photograph taken by a perpetrator of two Jews who are not allowed to walk on the pavement, but therefore must walk on the street. Anonymous Star of David, an anti-Semitic poster, and something that I will show very briefly because it's a humiliating perpetrator-taken photo of women in their underwear only minutes before their annihilation, before they were murdered. This is displayed in 2-meter size, so in overhuman size. This is how the Jewish victims are represented. Then we have another interesting trend that is especially prominent now in Hungary and Poland during the current authoritarian backlash we are seeing there. The focus on the individual rescuers of Jews who are portrayed individually with private photographs with their names and their stories, as opposed to the Jews who are not represented in that way. This is an example from the famous, much discussed Museum of World War II in Gdansk. You might have heard that many changes have been done to this exhibition because it's so contested by the Law and Justice Party. They are changing stuff constantly because they say that the museum should be not about Polish shame, but about Polish suffering and heroes. So they are adding now in the Holocaust section, for example, this photograph of the Ulma family, a Polish family who saved Jews. Another way of using this individualizing approach would be to focus on the victims and not to speak about the perpetrators. So in Croatia, at the Ustasha concentration campsite, former Ustasha concentration campsite, we have this very strong focus on the names, the drawings, and the testimonies on video from the victims. But what we don't have is a focus on perpetrators. It's being said that the Ustasha had been those who had killed the victims, but it's not discussed why this is a very rare example of a regime that had been running death camps on their own. You know, basically everyone else sold their Jews or deported them somewhere into German, gave them into German and Austrian hands. But in this case, it was the Croatians who were running the death camp. This is not discussed. So the victim focus can serve as a way not to deal with the perpetrator part or to just say it was the Ustasha. Let me come to a conclusion. So, in how far are thus Holocaust museums serving as role models in the examples I have discussed? Well, clearly there is a this phenomenon of traveling tropes when it comes to aesthetics and to musealization strategies. We see many examples of this. We also see explicit references by curators, architects, and so on, saying that our example was this or that Holocaust museum. And we can also say that individual testimonies, photographs, biographical objects of ordinary persecuted people are a strong museological tool, and that this has often replaced these formerly so prominent anonymous heaps of bodies or photos of masses taken by perpetrators. But, and this is my final conclusion, I would like to call that a download of a kind of template that can be used for almost every thinkable local and national memory politics need. Thank you. Oh. Almost thank you, by the way. My book has just been published on the post-communist memorial museums, and it's open access. So those of you who read German can also just download it in the internet. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Liliana, for this very impressive presentation, and I think it relates to a lot of what the Swedish colleagues are trying to do. We had a discussion in the afternoon, and I know that Erika also went to the museum in Riga, for example, so you are familiar with these things. First of all, any questions, suggestions, ideas from the public to our two presenters? Yes, please. Sorry.
I want to ask, I heard something, maybe it's not, that Jasenovac, they are making many changes in Jasenovac, and that Croatia is actually not very interested in this museum and in this monument which is there. Could you tell me something more information?
Well, as far as I know, luckily they are not changing anything at the moment. They have been planning to, yeah. But then there was a kind of combination between lack of interest and money and insecurity about in which direction would that go. Sometimes it's better if a certain government does not change the permanent exhibition. So there has been a lot of discussion about the commemoration, while there was a lot of historical revisionism from the side of the Croatian government. Now we have a kind of pet situation. So the most dangerous phase is always when the prime minister and the president are from the same party. Luckily now we have a kind of balance here, because the president of Croatia openly speaks against historical revisionism. So now things have gotten more complicated, and he regularly leaves commemorations if confronted with fascist slogans on t-shirts or something. So now we have luckily a more balanced situation. What will happen with the exhibition? They have been discussing the changes all over, but and I've been asking for changes for a long time, being born in Croatia, but at the moment I would say let's rather not change it, because it could even get worse than it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, suggestions?
Hi, we heard a little bit about the role of the Historical Museum in Stockholm with the construction of the new Holocaust Museum, but I don't think we heard much about the Jewish Museum. What role does the Stockholm Jewish Museum and the Jewish community play in plans for this new museum?
They will cooperate with the State Museum. The new Jewish Museum has a very good, I think, they worked through and changed the museum in many ways. Now they say that they are a museum for majority about the minority. And they're doing a lot of changes, which was very interesting. And they do have a collection, which will be, of course, interesting for the new Holocaust Museum in Sweden. So there is a lot of different parts. Will be a lot of cooperation, because the collection in Sweden is partly in Malmö and in different museums. So to make this, it's have to cooperate with all these different parts, which is also have collections. The collections is spread all over Sweden, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. Erika?
I was just thinking about something regarding your, I think a lot of objectives. Why do you why do you have, that is for me the main question is, why do you have a museum about Holocaust? What is it that you want to do? That is a very important question to ask yourself if you're curating, is what do you want to reach with this? Do you want to fight antisemitism, or do you want to honor or show what happened to the victims? Mm-hmm. So, and the objectives is what you have to work with when you, to really focus on what is it, the goal for this. Is it to memorize, or what is it? And for me, it's a bit different. I don't have a problem with memorizing. We don't work with that. We were working with fighting anti-Semitism and racism, which I think it's different, because it's not a total line always between remembering and changing things. That is not the same.
May I? That
Please.
Brings me to what I wanted to say about your remark during your presentation anyways, when you said that you have only a few anti-Semitic groups in Stockholm, in Sweden, who are getting more and more anti-Semitic. I would say, lucky you. Welcome to Austria, where the situation is a bit different. So this is definitely not what we can say. We have anti-Semitism from the left, from the right, from the middle, and it's not an extremist problem, it's a problem of the society. And therefore, I think one way to tackle that, but only one of many, can be to critically discuss what happened in the past. Again, you are right that this is the crucial question. What do we want with our museums? Yeah. Do we want to feel good? Because now we also have a Holocaust museum, which, by the way, Austria does not have. Or do we want to critically also and self-critically put the finger in there where it hurts, and also discuss our own role, and also the role of our society in where not everything went well? And this can be, of course, a purpose anywhere where there is a connection to, okay, we played any role whatsoever in the Holocaust, then of course there is a self-critical reflection that should be the point. And it cannot be about leaving it in the past. And I like that very much about what in your presentation that you made very clear, that it's all about also the present. And I would argue that any museum, in any case, is about the needs and the purposes of today. Usually it's often enough about nationalistic identity-making purposes, but we can opt against that and do something very self-critical and also full of empathy for the individual victims. That would be a good combination, and also to search for the gaps. My favorite subjects are always the voids and the gaps. You have hinted at that the story of the persecuted Roma and Romnia are an issue, of course. In many of the museums I have looked at, they are, if at all, then exhibited in a very stereotypical way that upsets me horribly, and then I keep texting them, you cannot show those pictures, come on. They are more humiliating than whatever you're trying to say. Yeah, so identifying the gaps, self-critically reflecting the role of one's own collective, and not reducing it to a symbolic memory would be the three things I would say that the Holocaust Museum can be about. Yeah.
Okay, so we have one more. Sandro, die Mikrofon für die Rese, bitte.
Thank you very much. Short question, but maybe the answer is not so simple. Both of you, yeah. Are there any examples in Europe which you would say this would be something like a good practice model? Yeah, because in Austria we have, as already mentioned, no Holocaust museum, but we have some memorials, yeah, in Austria, and we have not an institution like the Forum of Living History is, but similar one for education and or working on some parts of it. So, but because this is a long-standing idea of mine, so there's no national museum of Holocaust in Austria, and would it be a good idea to establish it? And is there an example in Europe or not all over the world?
I visited the Jewish Museum yesterday here, and I thought it was very good presented in a thematic way, that you have politics, you have the victims, you have kind of perpetrated and the objects were in focus. because in the museum, objects are, of course, the thing which is a kind of iconic thing that is loaded with different interpretations, and you can do a lot of things to put the object in the center. I thought it was very pieces of that. I would, if I was going to do a Holocaust museum here, I would work with that.
Okay. May I? Do you want to add to that, or we have a question? Okay, please.
Thank you. And since I was speaking about the authoritarian backlash in Hungary and Poland, my answer might come as a surprise, because the best practice example I have is actually from Budapest. There is a Holocaust Memorial Center that has a permanent exhibition from 2006. So it would be a kind of proof of what I was asking before, like how did each country change their exhibitions to prove that we are Europe ready for EU accession. The museum was opened in 2004, 2 weeks before Hungary joined the EU, I think. And what they do there is they do both this individualizing approach. So there are 5 family stories, 4 Jewish and 1 Roma, that are as different as possible. And those family stories accompany us from room to room, from being robbed, being deprived of rights, until the annihilation. This is the one strand. They also do an individualization of perpetrators, giving their biographies, the Nazi ones and the Hungarian ones. And the most interesting thing is that they really scrutinize Hungarian responsibility for the Holocaust in every possible aspect. So both about Miklos Horthy, the head of state during World War II, who is often exculped and it's all blamed on the Nazi occupation, or also on anti-Semitic traditions in Hungary long before World War II. And what they also do, and this is my favorite example, unfortunately I didn't bring it today, they show 3 pictures of population as perpetrators. Visual images of not government officials or policemen or something are so rare. And there we not only have Hungarians looting, stealing from a Jewish ghetto, but also women as perpetrators. So there is so much on this visual level that is here shown that we usually don't get. And I thought this was very inspiring. And now there is a plan to open a second Holocaust museum that will be about the Hungarian Jewish love story and the Hungarian rescuers. But luckily there has been quite some international protest against this project, so it has not been open yet. But also in Budapest, like to have a second Holocaust museum that would tell a different story. I think that's very interesting.
Can I just say something? I was thinking about this. Sorry, can I do that?
May I just drop in a question for both of you? We are streaming this discussion, and we have Barbara Kirschblatt-Gimblet who is following us, and she has 2 questions actually for both of you, so maybe we can add that and then you can reflect on all this together. She says, what can museums offer that Holocaust education, books, films and commemorations do not? Is there not a tension between public history, museums, and commemorations like monuments? Is there not a greater opportunity for critical perspective and debate in museums? So maybe we can answer to that as well.
I was just thinking about, I was thinking it's so interesting what you say about the victims. I was thinking, could it be like this, that we know this generation is leaving us, and we try to grasp something with these iconic photos which will not be there. Could that, or how have you been thinking about, what is it behind this? Because I did the same investigation as you have did, and I saw maybe 20, 30 exhibitions looking a bit the same all over the world, in China, in the United States, all over the world. So what do you think? What is behind this? Would you like to evaluate that?
Yeah, clearly there is a boom in memorial museums. Oh, hi, Barbara, by the way. Nice to have you here, and thanks for the question. So there is obviously a boom in memorial museums. And a lot of wrong expectations about them being the cure or something that can heal us and all the far-right extremism, and like you would go there and then everything would be okay and no anti-Semitic family discussions anymore, which is obviously absurd, and museums cannot do that. They can be part of the process, and they can be one tiny bit building block of that, because what they can do, and that refers to Barbara's question, I think, is that there can be things that struck you in an unexpected way, and I'm not speaking about the pedagogy of horror, which we had previous times where people were overwhelmed when entering a memorial site by, I don't know, oversized corpses, photographs or something. But something can get you in a way that a discussion with people or a commemoration can't do. It can be an object that somehow connects to you and does something with you, with the pupil or an adult, because it's there, it has its aura, it connects to whatever, something you might have experienced. And this material dimension has a power that, okay, we cannot make prognosis about that, it might work or it might not work, or the testimonies, or the combination of everything, of the aesthetics, of the objects, and especially if they tell those biographical stories, or if they are forensic objects and tell the story of where and how something was found and which history did it have afterwards, how was it maybe misused for some purposes and then ended up being in the museum. If all this is told, then it can grab you somehow in a way that, I don't know, discussions cannot.
Okay.
I think if you look into yourself, I have my grandmother rings here because I feel like I have a part of my grandmother when I've carried these things, and I love them for that. And I think it's the same, but the thing with objects in museum is that they are so important for the one who was carrying the rings, for the individual. And sometimes it can be a problem to carry that out because it's quite individual. It's only important for that person. An object which you think is nothing could be everything for a human being, for someone else. But there is, what you say, I totally agree, something iconic around objects. And of course, if you start to argue, did this really happening? We don't have that problem in Sweden. We don't have so much revisionism. But I know there is a problem with saying that the Holocaust didn't really take place. It's only a thing that Jewish people found out because they want to have power, things like that. Then I think these real objects are telling another story, and that's why it's so important. They are for real.
We just want.
Yes, please.
Historical revisionism, in the sense of the Holocaust did not happen, is not such a big issue in Austria either.
No.
It's rather about commemorating the dead Jews in a symbolic way is fine for almost everyone, but then when we think about how does that translate to our responsibilities today and to today's anti-Semitism, then it gets really hairy.
Yeah.
And of course there are far-right extremists who would go for the classical historical revisionism, but the problem is how that translates into today's understanding of blaming the Jews for, I don't know, whatever, everything. Today's Jews, not having some conspiracy theories as the Nazis did. So I think this is the crucial thing I just wanted to add.
May I throw in an idea here? I think that Austria is actually suffering from a very special problem. It's not so that we do not recognize the Holocaust, but I think that we have a special way of looking at it, in a way of what I would call derealization. So till today, we very often get this impression that it happened in strange places far away that nobody has ever been to, and it was perpetrated by people that nobody ever knew, and they were sort of half monsters, whereby the historical reality is completely different. If we look at the sources and see that those Austrian policemen who actually carried out the mass killings in 1941 in Galicia, and they killed tens of thousands of people, continued after the war to be policemen. Yeah? And when you try to imagine that, and which I've been playing with this idea of a map of just to show where are the old Nazis sitting in the 40s and 50s, and you imagine then the Jews would they want to come back, where on every second corner they can meet somebody who was a real murderer. Yeah? So I think this is something we do not want to confront ourselves with. Yeah? And this is what we should do. So we should bring it down actually also when we talk about perpetrators to the very real local level, because it was a very horrible local level, also here, and a lot of the horrible things happened at our doorstep. Yeah, so I think that's one of the big problems. The other one is that we don't talk about, and here I'm talking shop for my own institution, we are forgetting about the resistance. To talk about resistance was not very popular in Austria in the 50s and 60s during the Cold War, but even today, I mean, even you, both of you, when you were talking about the victims, the bystanders and the perpetrators, but the resistance, it's nowhere. So it's sort of, even when we talk about rescuers, this is getting a little bit of a bad taste at the moment, yeah, because it's being instrumentalized. So I think this is also something that we must talk about, how we try to actually honor these people, and there were nearly 10,000 who lost their lives in Austria. So we should not forget that in all these narratives.
I agree. And coming from former Yugoslavia, of course, resistance is a big issue, where the Tito partisans had, on the one hand, fought the battle and rescued many, also Jews and Roma, who were able to hide with them, but then, on the other hand, had committed crimes afterwards and, played a problematic role as well. So, for me, speaking about the resistance is, of course, a crucial part, but it's not so much in the museums, and that's what's reflected then maybe in the presentation, speaking about the museums. If the resistance is not in the museums, then I can only mention it as a gap if we come to that, but
There's a question, how much how much do you involve the pupils and the schools? Because I think this is the most important thing, to educate the young generation in the right way and to show what can happen.
They are our biggest target group. Through the teachers, we reach everyone in Sweden, and they are really the big target groups. And what we actually started with is, it's not enough to start when they're teenagers, you have to start much earlier. Yeah. So now we are even doing programs which we have to work with the Holocaust in another way. We cannot really go straight into it. We do a kind of way that is very good for students which are 10. We have to start much earlier. It's when values and attitudes are building up much earlier in a human being. So this is what we do a lot also. But the problem is, like in Sweden, is that we have to work with what is the teachers had to work with. So it's what it says in the books that they have to do. So it says in the books when you go to gymnasium that you have to study Holocaust and so on. But for younger children, it's not sure that they go and study human rights or so on, because they are not told that they have to do it. So this is what we try to convince them, how important it is to talk about things like this really early.
I don't work with pupils, but with teachers. So, when I did my first political education course, I thought the problem will be to discuss how the teachers can work with the pupils who will say, oh, not again World War II, not again Holocaust. But then I ended up being quite surprised, because it had been the teachers themselves who had brought this attitude to the course and were like, really? Holocaust again? World War II? Huh? So the problem lay somewhere different than I would have expected it. And that was a very not so nice surprise for me, because then we had to first establish that basically it was 10 years ago, the first time I did that, so it might have improved, but back then it showed very quickly again that those who say, oh, not again World War II or Holocaust, are those who know the least, whereas those who know a lot would never have that kind of attitude. So this, we have heard enough, translates directly into, I don't know so much, but I just don't want to know, and that's why I don't know. So this was the problem that I've experienced. And then I teach university students, but there it's like people who choose to come to the courses are so eager to learn, and it's beautiful to work with them, and they are just then surprised when I come to anti-Gypsyism, and then they have not heard so much about that, and then you see like they look like sponges who are like drinking in all the information. But this is a completely different setting, of course.
And I would just say the challenges is, of course, to reach a teacher who don't want to work with, don't think this is important. For example, I met in the south of Sweden truck drivers, children who were learning how to drive trucks, and the teacher said to me, how do you think I could talk with these children about Holocaust? How could I do that? So then you have to kind of, connect to them so they will see I have to do this because it's important for me as a teacher, whatever I learned. And then you have to do in different levels, programs in different levels to different teachers. And we know that guys are more intolerant than girls, for example, sorry to say, but it is so. So then you have to reach them. So we know quite a lot where we should go, and there is where we have to put focus on also.
I have here some more remarks by Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet. She writes, may there be other, even more radical approaches, like the evidence room by Robert Jan van Pelt, so that all Holocaust museums do not look the same, she says, and adds, real objects don't convince deniers that the Holocaust happened, they just cannot be convinced. And the third one is the tripartite division is a problem with bystanders as a residual category, plus victims can be perpetrators and vice versa, and also bystanders, fluid categories and not as useful today as they once seemed. To the last one I would very much agree, and I would actually drop in an idea. We have gone over to very much, for all the people involved, try to look not at whether they were good or bad, yeah, in this classical sort of opposition, but try to look what their options actually were, what was available to them as a field of activity, and how did they live with these possibilities. Yeah? So how did they use their options in a certain critical moment? There were assessments that saved Jews. Yes, interesting. The motivation is very hard to fathom, but you can see that very often what you do is very much depends on the options that you have, and in a given moment, how do people react? Yeah? Do they use these options for the better or for the worse? So both is there, and I think this we found, especially in educational programs, to be a very useful approach. So I stop here. Please, the two discussants. We are close to 8 o'clock. I think maybe you try to answer some of the questions as far as you want, and maybe if there are two more additional questions, we can ask them, and then we do a final round and close the event for tonight. Yes? Mm-hmm. Please.
So what I love about Van Pelt's exhibitions, as for example the one he did on Auschwitz at the Jewish Heritage Museum in New York, I mean it's a traveling exhibition, but I think because of the pandemic it's still stuck there, that he would ask himself, okay, how can I make a difference by, for example, when you have these heaps of shoes, then he would take out one shoe and point from the mass to the individual. In this case, it's not the biographical object, it's just, we don't know whom the shoe belongs to, but still it makes you think differently. Or you would have the classical Judaica, I don't know, candlelights and the Stars of David and something, and then you come closer and read, and then you find out where they were found and why they ended up in the exhibition, not because they look Jewish, but because they tell us a fascinating story that we would have missed otherwise. So they are there for a very, very particular purpose of their forensic history or their biographical story of biographical objects. Yeah. So those exhibitions then look different, and everything is there because someone thought about it a lot and not because it's a symbol for something. Regarding what you said, Gerhard, about the different roles, of course, since I worked a lot in the post-communist setting, there it's even more complicated because in many cases those who had been the perpetrators first were later then victimized in some way, not in the same, but by the socialist regimes, and then they are of course portrayed as exclusively victims because they had suffered by the Soviets, and then everything turns from being very complicated to very easy. And this is my usual everyday context. Then there is this new term of the implicated subject that Michael Rothberg has introduced. I think this is also very interesting. Like, what is it if someone didn't just watch, but did something else, maybe shout and chant something anti-Semitic or anti-Roma or whatever, and other things that try to blur these categories. I think questioning our categories is also one thing that museums can do. It's very complicated to do with short texts, but it's a good thing to try.
Okay.
Yes, I was thinking like this. I think that to do a really good museum have to be on different levels. It's also the society as a whole have to be asking questions about norms and changing of norms. I mean, it's not only individuals that do things, they do something because something is coming from up above them. And I think it's very important to learn people about the norms and how they change it and how fast it goes and what kind of norms do we carry on today that we are not able to see. So we look into each other. And I think the best exhibition have to be on all these levels at the same time. This is the challenge. It's have to ask the structural questions on a very high level about norms, and it have to be about how we act as a human being in a kind of very broad academic way, in going into psychology, society, social, everything, all these actors, and as well these roles. It's only when you see all perspectives at the same time. So I think these exhibitions, which are now traveling around a lot, that is about the victims, it's only one part. It doesn't say the whole thing, and it doesn't tell the whole story, and that is the problem with that, I think.
Okay. So, any more questions in the auditorium? If not, I would say, Erika, may I ask you something? Is there something that you take back from this encounter here in Vienna for your museum? Was it fruitful? Maybe can you give us a little bit of a reaction to that?
It was very fruitful. I think in many ways it's been very inspiring, and of course I only get more questions, I have to, if I'm honestly, and that's very, very good, because you have to have all these questions when you start. But I think that it's very important to really be very, very sure of what you're doing and why. This question is so important when we are not creating the museum, but we are part of this collection. So I think that is very, very important. It's been very inspiring. And I think that to work with children and to ask all these questions at the same time is very important.
Well, thank you very much then. I think then Liliana will probably be one of your severe critics, or maybe even somebody who can be of help in the process of creation. So I think we've tried to bring together two of the best experts in the field, at least from the Austrian side. I can say we can't do any better. And thank you very much all for joining in, for giving us your ideas. Thank you very much also to the Swedish Embassy and to Morten for having organized this on this very remarkable day. I think that the idea of IHRA needs to be promoted much more. It's an important organization, and also in Austria it's not known enough. So a lot more people should know what IHRA is and what IHRA does. And I think we've contributed to that a little bit. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.